Let's get started tonight on our 14th lesson in our Concerning Jesus series. I want to remind everyone we will not meet next week on this meeting because that's Thanksgiving week. I know it sneaks up on all of us, but there it is. Next week we're not going to have the Wednesday night with Thursday being Thanksgiving. I know that can be prep night and holiday night and not everybody is around, and so we will not meet. And so for those watching online that are watching in real time, there will be a gap. We won't have one up next week. Most people don't watch in real time. They watch weeks later, months later. So you can ignore this if you're watching that and go, because there will be one by the time you watch this. There will be a 15th lesson. Speaking of watching this, if you are watching, there is in the description of this video, if you're watching at YouTube, go into the description and there is an outline available for you. This is a 2-pager this week. 2 pages I think I can get through. Yes, Larry, I think I can do it. This is a first for us in this room. It's not the first time we've had a 2-pager. It's the first time we've had a single subject since we've been in the Old Testament, finding Jesus. When we're looking for Jesus in Genesis, Exodus, Torah, I'm always pulling in multiples, going, okay, here's one from this chapter. And then we go 4 chapters. I go, here's one from this chapter. And I've done as many as 4 or 5 in a night. It's gotten to where I'm doing more like 3 in a night. Don't cover quite as many. So we're at Samuel. We're at 1st and 2nd Samuel. And my intent going into the week was to do what we've always done, 3 or 4 of them. And there's plenty. There's plenty in 1st Samuel, 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Chronicles is essentially a retelling of the Samuel and Kings story, by the way. So the 2 Samuels and the 2 Kings, they sort of get squeezed into 2 books called the Chronicles, which are actually the last books of the Hebrew Bible, are the Chronicles. They are just telling the whole story. They're just bringing you right up to the edge of where the Ode story stops. So when we do this, I don't know that we'll do any Chronicles. I'll see. I don't try to not commit myself in the moment, but I was thinking Samuel. Maybe we could do a little bit of 1st and 2nd Samuel tonight. Maybe even slide in something from the Kings. Who knows if we'll even do any beyond that. Well, then I got to David and Goliath as I was studying, and I thought, I need to say that. And then I'm reading, and then I go, and I need to talk about that. And then I need, we really, if we're going to do this right, then we got to go down that road. And so I looked down, and I got that and that and that and that, and I went, okay, tonight's David and Goliath. Because there's just no way to do this right and just squeeze little David's story in there as one of 2 or 3. So this is our first time of taking an Old Testament story all by itself, making it the subject. But I'm calling this Jesus the Giant Killer. And this is on the heels of a couple of weeks ago here at the Garden. And for those watching, a message we posted a couple weeks ago called Giants in the Land, where we talked about the fact that when Israel goes across the Jordan and into the Promised Land, they are not in a land void of problems. They are not in a perfect place. Even though it's the land that flows with milk and honey, which, by the way, never meant there's rivers of milk and ponds of honey. That's an allegory for times are going to be different. There's going to be blessings there. However, in the midst of a land that flows with milk and honey are enemies and giants and problems. And, 1 Samuel actually tells the story of one of those literal giants, Goliath. So for Christians, for centuries, we have read the stories like David and Goliath, and we have seen them as images of giants in the midst of the Promised Land that have to be brought down. They're brought down by faith. They're brought down by courage. Even outside of Christianity, David and Goliath's a famous story because it's the underdog beats the big dog. You hear it every week in sports. Every week there's a football game or a basketball game, something. Sports loves it, where they go, it's a true classic clash between David and Goliath. Even though the weird thing is that they almost always pick a big school playing a little bitty school, and they don't know the moral of the David and Goliath story. The little bitty school is supposed to win. And it's rarely do they think that through whenever they start to tell that illustration. But so my point is this thing permeates our culture, the idea, and we love this idea. We love the idea of the underdog, the poor guy, the little guy, the weak guy, beating up on the overlord and the big boss, and the big corporation comes down. We want the little guy to get his day. So there's some practicality to the story that feels like Jesus. Here's Jesus with the adulterous woman. Here's Jesus with the blind man. Here's Jesus with the publican in the center. It's the outcast. It's It's the underdog. It's the get out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. So it feels like a Jesus moment. This is the very fact that you face off with something bigger. But it's even more a Jesus moment than that, because Jesus is the Son of David. The Samuel books tell us about a prophet named Samuel, but then all about the monarchy of Israel, how they go from judges, people who rise up, lead, die. Someone else rises up, leads, dies. And those judges are all over the map of quality and character. But Samuel leads us into the kingships of Saul and David and Solomon. And most of the two books are talking about the kingdoms and then the fracture where Israel becomes Judah and Israel, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then things start to get a little confusing because you got this guy's the king over this side and this guy's the king over the other side. And then you kind of lose track on who's king and what's going on. But for the bulk of the books, it's David's story. And David, being the key figure, becomes the thing that we remember in this. When Jesus comes along, he's recognized as the royal heir to the Davidic line in the New Testament. It's why we call him the Son of David. No one means he's David's kid. It means that he belongs in that lineage of David of which both Luke and Matthew's genealogies bring out. That David is in the bloodline of this baby born in the manger. We're about to hit Advent. We're going to be heading towards the arrival of Jesus in the manger, and you're going to hear statements over the next week, several weeks, about this one who's born of David's line. That makes seeing him as David easy in many ways. But seeing him as David in every way is a mistake. And it's a mistake with any type. You'll recall when we talked about Judges a few weeks ago, or last week, I told you that it's difficult because a lot of the judges had these great moments, but they have these terrible moments. So it starts to become difficult to really find the Jesus character. Like you might want Jesus to be this guy, and then you don't get one more paragraph later and you go, uh-oh, yeah, that's not Jesus. And that's okay too. I didn't bring this out last week to kind of save this thought for this week, and they're types, and that's all they are. They're not little Jesuses. They're not little messiahs that we're reading and going and taking principles from. They're just types of Jesus. But remember, we're looking at the texts concerning Jesus. There's our title. We're not looking at those that are not. So it is okay to say that in some ways there are Jesus qualities to Gideon, while also saying he's not Jesus. And therefore, there are some qualities about Gideon that are not Jesus. I give you that disclaimer because if Jesus is the Son of David, it sounds like whatever David brings to the table, that's Jesus. Careful, if you've never read David, don't land on that, because David has his moments. We're going to study one where, man, that's what Jesus looks like. And he has some other moments where that is not what Jesus looks like at all. And so once again, I think when Jesus on the road to Emmaus starts to open the scriptures and show the scriptures concerning himself, I don't have any doubt that he probably picks a few unconventional moments. I'd love to hear that conversation between Jesus and the two fools on the road to Emmaus. But we don't get to hear it. But I have a feeling that there were some moments in there where he cherry-picked moments in people's lives and went, this is like the Son of Man. And maybe they went, what about this moment? And they go, no, I said this is like the Son of Man, not that is like the Son of Man. So I don't want you to get trapped into thinking that the character has to reflect him in every way, but we do definitely have a slice of it here. I want to show you the New Testament in regards to Jesus being the Son of David. I just want to give you some proof text, okay, so that you've got them to work with. Luke chapter 1, and this is a nativity moment. This is an announcement of the arrival of Jesus moment. Luke chapter 1, verse number 30. The angel says to Mary, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. He'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." He has not ever sat on a throne in the lineage of David. However, the New Testament does tell you that he is seated at the right hand of the Father. So what we are as Christians reading this story with the Jewish backdrop of the David story and the kingdom story that gets introduced here, we are then to take that what Jesus is going to do is reign in the same way that David reigned over the people of God, but obviously in a completely different way. Just wanted to show you a couple more. Romans chapter 1, verse 3. This is the Apostle Paul's introduction to the church at Rome. And he says the gospel concerning Jesus, his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh and declared to be Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by resurrection from the dead. There's Paul declaring Jesus to be descended from David. And one more, Revelation 22. The New Testament closes. I just kind of want to show you Gospels, epistle, apocalyptic language. There's an agreement in the New Testament that starts to see Jesus as the fulfillment of these things. Revelation 22:16. It is I, Jesus, who sent my angel to you with this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. He doesn't bother to say the descendant of Solomon. He doesn't bother to say the descendant of Abraham. He's doing David for a reason. David's a king. If you're a descendant of David, if you're a descendant of the king, what are you? You're the king. And so Jesus is calling himself the descendant of David. Now, I did all that little pre-work so that when we get into our David and Goliath story, I can very easily then just interchange and go, Jesus. When we're talking about David, then I can say Jesus. I wouldn't say that in every moment of David's life, but I hope you can understand why we would do it that way. 1 Samuel 17 is the one. I put number 1 when I was starting this outline, thinking there was a chance I'd have a number 2. I don't. It's all number 1. Jesus as the giant killer. There is no number 2. Everything we're going to do tonight is going to be in relation to Jesus, the giant killer. 1 Samuel 17 tells us the story of David and Goliath. This is the story of a child versus a true warrior. There is no doubt some hyperbole in this story. There's no doubt some overblown numbers for effect. For instance, the height of Goliath, according to the text, is somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall, depending on what nation gets to do the measuring. Okay, maybe there were giants 8 to 10 feet tall. Maybe it's just a number that's supposed to be so crazy big that you think, wow, that was just a really big dude. So in whatever case, we're dealing with something where the author tries to set up the story between something that cannot win against something that cannot lose. That's the whole point. Something that looks on the face ridiculous to even be out there. Kids don't go out onto the battlefield. And something that looks ridiculously hard to beat. So remember, just keep this in the back of your head. Paul said, by the foolishness of preaching, many would be saved. By the foolishness of the cross, because the gospel goes forth. It's almost like you look at it, a naked guy dying on a tree killed by empire against the big boy of empire, against the big boy of sin and death and the devil. And so that contrast is supposed to smack the audience in the face, okay? It highlights what is called in history books champion warfare or single combat. In other words, the outcome of a single duel determines the entire conflict, and they do this to avoid bloodshed. For instance, in the Iliad, there's multiple references to single combat between, say, one member of one nation and one warrior on one side and one warrior on the other side, make an agreement to come out, we will fight to the death, and then whoever wins, that keeps the rest of these thousands of guys from dying. And so the others will just lay down their arms and become your slave or your servant, or we'll just get on the boats and go home, whatever the agreement is, so that there's not multiple bloodshed. So what the author of Samuel is doing is not a new thing. This is not original, okay? They're borrowing this idea from the traditions of man, this idea of single combat champion warfare, which you don't need me to help you with this probably. This is the perfect setup for the New Testament's champion warfare, where the singular man, Christ Jesus, will go out on behalf of the rest of all of humanity to duel with the forces of darkness. And whoever wins, wins. And the other must become the slave to that. So if Christ gets swallowed by death, then all of us have no hope, but we're going to die. We'll all perish. If Christ wins over death, all of us win over death. Christ becomes the representative man, the David, but to make it fun, it's got to be Goliath. It can't be the David versus another little kid. It can't be Jesus on equal footing. So he has to become a man. He has to give up the divinity. Okay, let's make it even harder. He has to die innocent. He has to die with other people's guilt on him. Like we're giving him all kinds of bad baggage. We're making him punier and punier on the field. We're making it harder and harder and harder for him to overcome. So that's part of the point. The chapter, this is just a point of order thing. I like to do these for you. Chapter seems to be maybe an insertion, or perhaps the chapter occurs out of chronological order. I don't want to get bogged down on this, but here's a for instance. David is introduced to Saul in 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 to 23. You get to the end of the Goliath story in 1 Samuel 17:55. Saul doesn't know who he is. That's baffled Bible scholars forever. Like David plays his instrument in front of King Saul, whatever it was, his little guitar, and Saul, the evil spirit, departs because he's anointed. That's 1 Samuel 16. And then David goes right out and fights Goliath. And you get to the end of the Goliath story, and Saul goes, "Who's this?" And then David walks up, and Saul goes, "What's your name?" And David goes, "Well, David doesn't say, well, I don't know, you moron, I just met you one chapter ago." Doesn't say that. Of course, you go, well, he wouldn't say that to the king. But there's this weird moment where it very much looks like Saul has never met him before. So what that kind of tells us is that either the story's an insertion, maybe in the wrong spot, or that the story's just being told out of chronological order, which wouldn't be entirely unusual in a lot of writings, but when you're doing a history writing, it is a little odd to tell it out of order. I leave that to you. Do with that as you will, okay? I like to throw these little tidbits in at you sometimes as we study so that you can kind of look into it if you'd like to. Here's the way I want to handle this tonight. I know it's a long chapter. It's 53 verses long, 58 verses long. Okay, I don't think we'll read every verse. What I do want to do, though, is I have specifically grabbed some passages I'd like to read, and then I want to stop and talk with you a little bit about each story and where I see Jesus fitting in. And we're going to have to put brick on brick here, okay? So some of this is we've got to build our case as we go. So let's introduce this story. Verse 1, the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. They were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Ezekah in Ephes Damim. Saul and the Israelites gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and they formed ranks against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley between them. You can see the blocking here. It's almost like what you do if you were writing out a screenplay. And you can see this in your head. There's a scene in the movie Troy. If you've never seen Troy, there's a scene right near the beginning of the movie that almost mirrors this intro to 1 Samuel 17. And it's single warrior combat. So if you kind of want to know what that looks like in ancient terms, that was kind of a pretty good example of this. Philistines stood on the mountain one side, Israel is on the other side. Verse 4, there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. You might want to underline name and location. Whose height was 6 cubits in a span. Again, we're all over the place on what cubits are. 18 inches. If you're Egyptian, they're like 24 inches. They're sometimes referred to as the distance between a grown man's elbow and the end of his middle finger. However long that is, it's tall. He had a helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs. He had a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. The spear's head was 600 shekels of iron. Shield bearer went before him. It's supposed to overwhelm you. It's a big guy. Big guy with a lot of armor, must be strong. He stood up and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, we'll be your servants. If I prevail against him and kill him, you'll be our servants, and you'll serve us." And the Philistine said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and they were greatly afraid. So they've met an opponent they can't handle. Not even the king goes out to fight him. This had to be a debilitating moment for Saul's political campaign. This is like he does not go out to defend his people. And he is in some ways a type of anything man devises that he stands behind, that anything that he devises that he believes in. Nothing is going to be able to defend us from the enemy. Nothing built by human hands has a chance against Goliath. He's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. But I think something's happening in this story. And this to me is why it's important to see David as Jesus. Israel has a story. Their story starts in Genesis as far as they're concerned. And their origin story is more than how God created the earth. We've made a way bigger deal of that than their story makes of that. They confine the creation story to a few verses. Here's how God did it. There's a whole lot of language there that's kind of saying we don't really know how God did it. God did it and that was one day. Then God did that and that's another day. But then when they slow down and they start having conversations, here comes man, here comes woman, here comes a talking snake that's walking through a garden. Here comes a conversation between the snake and the woman. And then really important, piercing things start to happen in that story where God gets questioned for the first time in the Bible. And he's questioned by the snake, who accuses God of essentially lying. He's not really here to do any good for you. The snake becomes the voice of accusation. The snake tries to point out an alternate set of facts, an alternate truth. Man's deceived, falls for it, removed from the garden, and then sort of banished. And Israel knows that the story of man then is that sometimes we come up an opponent who causes us to question God, who is out to try to make us doubt God or lose our faith in God, and that the more we converse with him and the more that we talk with him, we almost always get ourselves in trouble and we almost always lose and we don't have a chance to overcome him. And so in a lot of their stories, they're just replaying that over again. They're replaying that confrontation to show you something that is bigger. When our snakes in the wilderness passage came along, there's no doubt in my mind that the story had at its core the snake from the Garden of Eden that comes up against God's people and bites them. Because that's what the snake does to Eve. He bites her. No, he doesn't really bite her, but he bites her. He bites her with a lie. He bites her with questioning. He bites her with accusation. And what happens? She's poisoned. And thus everybody else is poisoned. That's the whole point of that. Goliath represents something bigger than himself, and I think it's in the language. 1 Samuel 17:5, we just read it, but go back. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. Bronze is the Hebrew word nehoshet, and the Hebrew word nehoshet, meaning bronze, sounds a lot like the Hebrew word for serpent, nehesh. In fact, and I don't do Hebrew pronunciations, but I've studied enough people that do to know that these two words audibly in the Hebrew sound almost exactly the same. So how they are pronounced, sometimes the way a word is pronounced is to cause the listener to catch something that doesn't immediately meet the eye. So by calling it a nehoshet, which is close to nehesh, there's a connection made between bronze and serpent. And actually, they've already had that connection made for them. We made it together. What happens when they're bitten by snakes? God goes, make a brass snake. Make a nehoshet nehesh. Stick it on a pole, hold it up, and everybody that looks upon it can be healed. In other words, make something very close to what bit you, look upon the thing that bit you, something similar to what bit you, and so that there is a relief there. So the connection's already been made between bronze and serpent. And I think it's because what the author's trying to do is show you this is a giant in the promised land that's just like the snake in the garden. He's just a new version of the snake in the garden. He's a giant. He's not a snake. He's a giant, but he's a snake. Let me say that again. He's a giant. He's not a snake. He's a man, but he's a snake. And this happens a lot in the scriptures. It's not on the face. It's not right there. And part of it's not right there because it's in English. And so it might be a little bit easier in Hebrew. But here's another word too. In that 5th verse, he's also, not only does he have a helmet of bronze on his head, but he's armed with a coat of mail. All M-A-I-L in the English. Like chainmail, little links of metal. All other uses of this word in Torah refer to scales. They actually refer to scales on animals in the water. A lot of this is dietary law language when they would go, don't eat fish that don't have scales. Like Israel couldn't eat a catfish because it was a smooth body. They couldn't eat a shark. And the reasons for that, you can argue all day long as to why God made crustaceans and shellfish off limits and why sharks couldn't be eaten and they couldn't eat eels. And so there would be this statement about that which had scales, and the word used for that is the same as the word for male. So it's also used of serpent scales. So it's not a stretch to see that the author has designed the armor on Goliath so that the reader will think snake. And snake equals liar. Snake equals opposition. So that David becomes something else. He becomes a second Adam. We're going to get another shot at this. Here comes the snake down out of the tree. And what's he doing? He's talking. And who's he bad-mouthing? God. Sounds a whole lot like the first time we heard this happen. And what did he have? He had Adam and Eve, and he got them. Well, now he's got this little kid, David. Well, that's just about as unfair. And I don't want to be an insult to ladies, but this is the Hebrew mentality when this is written. Women and children, they would have looked at as weaker than sending a man. So the first story has a woman, let's stick a kid in the second story. They're trying to show the weakness of that side of the confrontation. So you now have David up against a new snake, and the snake is talking. And you don't have to go out into the valley and talk, because the agreement of one man will fight the other man has already been laid out. And here's Goliath coming out into the valley doing the talking the way the snake talks in the Old Testament. Now, I don't want to read every verse. I want to pause here for a moment and just show you, you can see this as you look at it. In verse 12, David gets introduced. And he gets introduced as the son, an Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, named Jesse. 1 Samuel 17:12 looks very much like the introduction to a chapter. That's how we introduce characters in the Old Testament, kind of like Elisha the Tishbite. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. That's how we open stories. So there are scholars who think 1 Samuel 17:12 belongs way back in chapter 16, when David should have been introduced way back there. And in 1 Samuel 16, he's anointed to be the next king. Saul comes to his home. He looks over his 7 brothers. None of them qualify. Samuel comes to his home, not Saul, I'm sorry. Samuel comes to his home. Samuel's looking for the tall guy, the strong guy, the big guy, the handsome guy, the good-looking guy, the smooth guy. And they all qualify. And every time Samuel sees one, he goes, oh, that's got to be the one. And the Lord goes, that's not him. Oh, that guy's got to be the one. And he gets to the end of the line and says to Jesse, is that it? I mean, that ain't, none of them are it. And Jesse goes, well, I got another kid, but he's out in the field and we don't let him come around. He's out there taking care of sheep. You don't need him. He's a kid. And Samuel goes, well, I'll wait on him. And Samuel sits down. And the Lord speaks to him and says, you're judging on the outside, but I'm judging on the heart, so pay attention. And can you imagine God said something like to you? Like, you're just waiting around and God goes, you've been looking at stuff wrong. So stop looking on the natural. That, by the way, is a recurrent theme through the Bible. Stop looking at things in the natural. And so here comes little David. You know, he just walks up. Hey, he's a typical kid. He don't know what he's doing there. You know, he's just running errands. And old Samuel sees him, and the Holy Spirit speaks to Samuel and goes, this is the one. And Samuel takes his horn of oil out, takes the lid off, pours it over the top of his head. And little David just stands there with oil running down his body, and Samuel says, you're the next king. Now imagine, you're not in the bloodline, you're just the next king. You're the one. And so that's David. That's the introduction to the Davidic story. Does that happen before Goliath? Well, it does in the chronology. Should it happen after Goliath? Maybe. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that you as a reader have already read 16. So now here you are at 17. So you know this kid. He's the anointed one. He's our Jesus, right? He's the one anointed by the Holy Spirit without measure. He's the one that walks in. Now his dad, in the middle of 17, sends him to his brother's camp, and with bread and cheese. And so here's Aaron Boy David coming up with bread and cheese under his arm, meeting all of his big brothers. And they're in their military uniforms, and David's handing out snacks, and everybody looks depressed. And David goes, "What's the problem, guys? Why is everybody so down?" And they say, "Well, you're just a kid. What do you know? But this is big boy stuff." And they kind of ignore him. And David just hangs around. He's that pesky little kid. Till someone finally goes, "Well, there's a big guy out there named Goliath, and he threatened everybody. And we got to come up with someone that'll go fight him, and we ain't got anybody that can handle him. And so if we lose, we all lose. Whoever loses, we all lose. And if we could find someone that could beat him, we'd all win." And David goes, "I got it." Now, I tried to make him, sound like a little kid, because he's a little kid, essentially. He's not at war, which tells us he's not an adult. His brothers are at war. He's the errand boy that they didn't even think to bring to Samuel to show off. So David, cocky little kid, goes, "I got it." And everyone looks and his brothers get mad in the story. I'm skipping a lot. I'm not reading it, I'm telling you. I like to tell it more than I like to read it. And his brothers are like, they get mad at him and go, "You come in here with your cocky little attitude, your smart mouth, and you think you can go out here. Won't you shut up?" And David goes, "Look, man, I ain't scared. Bring it on. Who is this guy that he can mess with us?" Okay, that gets you up to right around here. Verse 31 of 1 Samuel 17. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. I kind of think they repeat them to Saul as a joke. Like, you got to imagine, you can't imagine they went, "Hey, we found a kid. Woo, we're excited. Let's send him out." I think it had to be like, Saul goes, "What are we going to do, guys?" And they go, "Man, nobody wants to fight this guy. I mean, we're crazy to send anybody out there." And he goes, "Well, what do we got?" And they go, "Well, you got, only the idiots think they can beat him. I mean, people like that stupid kid out there thinks he's got a shot." Okay, that's kind of what I think goes down. And then Saul, I guess he's got nothing to lose. They bring David to Saul, and David says in verse 32, "Let no one's heart fail him. Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him. You're just a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And it turned against me. I'd catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of the Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Now, I give Saul credit. I mean, I don't know how much faith he has in David. It might just be one of those things like, look, ain't nobody else going to fight him. Let's send this kid out there. Someone's going to die. Might as well not be one of my men. I kind of think it's probably what the king's like. Might as well not be one of my men. We'll send him out down there, see what happens. Now remember, David has just told Saul, I'm not worried about it. I'm a shepherd. Lions and bears come against the flock. I don't run away. Lion comes against the flock, I kill it. Bear comes against the flock, I kill it. It's hard to fathom. It's hard to imagine. Saul, no doubt, thinks the same thing. I want to pause for a minute and talk uncircumcised Philistine, because that sounds like a really weird thing to say. This uncircumcised Philistine. This is a reference to more than anatomy. Okay? Of course, you know what circumcision is. But the children of Israel were a circumcised people. And what circumcision meant was covenant. Circumcision is the sign of the covenant. It's what made you a part of the family of Israel. But what it really did was put you in Abraham's covenant. And so it's so important that when Moses comes out of Egypt, they circumcise all the Israelites that were not practicing circumcision in Egypt. They come out of Egypt and go, look, if we're going to be the people of God, we're going to have a telltale sign that we're the people of God. The sign is to us. The sign's not to the world. The world doesn't see it. It's a hidden sign. It's not a tattoo across your forehead. It's circumcision. So it's really only for the people who are circumcised. It's so that they remember they are the people of God. It's also so that the seed passes through the circumcision generation to generation, so that the story of who you are as the people of God passes from people to people. This sends the reader the message as to the true reason the conflict will turn out the way that it turns out. I don't want you to turn there, but I gave it to you. Hebrews 7:22. Jesus Christ, the guarantee of a better covenant. I throw that in because if uncircumcision means Goliath doesn't have a covenant, David is claiming that the reason Goliath's about to lose is he doesn't have a deal made with God. David doesn't come out and say it. I think it's an amazing little moment by David where he goes, guys, why are you, it kind of sounds to me like this. Guys, why are you so scared? He doesn't have a covenant. You think God dragged us out here in the middle of this valley to just cause us to all die? Like we're all going to die because of this one guy? He doesn't know God. Does that sound like the God that you know? I mean, it's kind of one of those out of the mouth of babes moments where David says, look, why would I be more scared of him? I'm going to beat a lion and a bear, but this guy don't even have a covenant. He's coming out here talking trash about your God, and he doesn't even know your God. He hasn't had God move in a miraculous way in his life. You have. Why would you bow down and be afraid of something that doesn't know what you know? And man, every Christian needs to hear this message once in a while in their life. Go, what are you so scared of right now? Do you think they have as many on their side as you have on your side? Do you think they understand covenant? Do you think they have Jesus doing for them what Jesus has done for you? Don't you know what he thinks about you? Now, the moment then that Saul goes, okay, get out there, go ahead and do what you're going to do, this happens in verse 38. Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head. What kind of helmet? Bronze helmet on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail or armor. Same Hebrew words that were used to describe Goliath's armor, which I already took painstaking moments to tell you was Hebrew code for this guy's a snake. And the snake is talking. And the snake is bad-mouthing God. Therefore, David becomes the second Adam. He becomes another chance at it. What does Saul do when he sends David into the battlefield except dress David just like Goliath? Saul armors David just like Goliath, and David refuses. In fact, he puts the armor on. There's a comical moment in the next few verses where he puts it on, he walks around, and he's like a little kid in his dad's shoes, you know? Like he's a little boy with his dad's suit coat on. He just looks ridiculous. And he just takes it off and he throws it down and he goes, forget it. I got to do what I got to do. I got to use my own equipment. Armors him just the same way he would armor a giant. David strapped Saul's sword over the arm. Let's go ahead and read that. He strapped Saul's sword over the arm. He tried in vain to walk. He wasn't used to them. And David said to Saul, I can't walk with these. I'm not going to use them. So David removed them, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi. The wadi's the creek. He put them in his shepherd's bag in his pouch, his slings in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Here's what I want you to think about. Saul armored David just like Goliath. David refuses because Jesus cannot use the methods of the enemy. He is not allowed to go to battle with the enemy's sword. If you have a Jesus, I'm just repeating myself again. If you have a Jesus who acts unlike the Jesus of the Gospels, you have created a different Jesus. You have created a false idol. Jesus does not pick up the devil's machine gun. He does not pick up the devil's nuclear bombs. He does not sit in heaven and go, well, the Sermon on the Mount was a good idea for a peaceful, more distant time than this, but now the world's a violent place, so I got to come back and do it right. And then Jesus comes back and just bombs everybody, slitting throats right and left. That's the Jesus that's wearing Goliath's armor. That's the offer in the wilderness. The temptation of the wilderness is a snake looking little David in the eye and saying, here you go. You can have the kingdoms of the world. Throw yourself off there. Turn those stones to bread. All of these offers, all of these things that on the face make sense, because if you're going to go to battle, you got to put on some armor. If you're going to be great, you might as well kick it off with a miracle. You came to feed people anyway, why not do it with rocks? You came to show the miraculous Father to people, why not do it by throwing yourself off of a building? Get things started right. You want to run the show? You talk about kingdom, you brag about bringing a kingdom? Let's just get it started right now. Bow knee to me, lock arms with me, you and me together, I'll give you the whole thing. You know what you and I could do together? I kind of think that's the offer of Satan to Jesus in the wilderness. Go, take a look at all of it, man. Just do it my way. My skill and your brains? Whew. I'm good behind the scenes. You're good on stage. Like you're really good with the masses. I'm good with moving people. You and me together, we'll run the show, man. It's the enemy's armor. And we're armoring ourselves with it all the time when we borrow the tactics of the world and try to drag them into the service of the king. They don't work because they don't fly in this kingdom. There's something else that we have to have. It doesn't work this way. I also like, and I didn't even put this in your outline. I figured, well, there's just so much and I'll talk about it as I go. But I love the fact that David won't use the armor of Saul, but chooses rather to go down to the nearest creek and pull out 5 stones so that he can use his slingshot. And this is because the slingshot is David's weapon of choice. Now, here's a little thing for you to chew on. I think David is unafraid for 2 reasons. One, he truly believes what he just said about covenant. He believes this guy don't have one, we do. Worst thing that happens is I die, but somehow God makes a miracle happen. I'm willing to take that chance. I believe in God that much. The other reason I don't think he's scared is because he's a slingshot user. He fights from a distance, and he's good at it. And when he takes the sword off and the helmet off and the shield off, kind of cracks his neck and loosens his arms a little bit, pulls that slingshot out of his pouch and goes down into the creek and just reaches down in and grabs some stones, kind of bounces them in his hand, gets a feel for their weight, drops them into his bag, walks out onto the field. And if you'll notice, when we get into the fight, David pulls a rock out, sticks it in a slingshot, and starts swinging that thing over his head. And you don't use a slingshot up close. You use it from a distance. And if you're good at it, you want some distance. And David knows that all he really has to do is put the rock in the right spot and Goliath will run right into it. And I believe that there is something to be said for the confidence of knowing what you're good at and what you are and staying in your lane. And that if you stay in your lane, in your strength, you're at your best. It's when you get out of your lane to try to do things you're not called to do, you're not anointed to do, you're not good at doing, that you lose your strategic advantage. For David, it's like 2 boxers. If a boxer has 6 inches on his opponent, he's a fool for getting inside and trying to throw uppercuts. That works to the smaller man's advantage. Now he's in close where he can hit. The taller guy wants to maintain his distance, use his jab, make the short guy work all day long to ever land the shot that really matters. But if you give up your advantage because you think it's cool to do somebody else's thing, or you're emulating someone that you're not, or you're trying to impress someone that doesn't need impressed, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. So if David takes a sword and a javelin and a dagger out onto the battlefield, he can't beat a Goliath. He steps outside of what he's good at. But if he takes the sling into the battlefield, and I think it actually sinks in on Goliath before the rock does. And I think it's why, as the story goes on, they actually run towards one another, or Goliath runs towards him. I want to throw something in, though, before I get there. Verse 43, the Philistine came on and drew near. 43. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" The Philistine cursed David by his gods, by the way, with sticks. The old ancient sling was a piece of leather attached to the end of a stick. And so they would swing that around the end of the stick. And there would be a piece of that in their hand. And when they were ready to release the rock, they would release the piece of leather and the rock would go. And you talk about needing practice. I mean, I'd hit myself in the head right away trying to do this. If you know what you're doing, though, you can get some serious speed that comes behind that rock. And so when Goliath sees it, all he sees from a distance are sticks. So he says, "You come out here with sticks? You think you're going to fight me with sticks on this field?" Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the animals of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and all the assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, because the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Goliath actually speaks to David the reverse of the Edenic blessing, which is, I'm going to feed you to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. The Edenic blessing is the birds of the air and the beasts of the field are yours to eat. So the blessing gets flipped as a curse coming out of the mouth of Goliath. So he's speaking the very opposite of what David's bringing to the table. And the enemy always speaks the very opposite. When God doesn't look loving, you know you're listening to the enemy. When God isn't forgiving, you know you're listening to the enemy. When God isn't gracious, you know you're listening to the enemy. This is really simple to do. When it's evil, it ain't God. Okay? And when it's evil, it ain't God. It's the voice of Goliath. It's the snake. He's taking whatever God said and he's just flipping that thing around and then he's presenting it to you. And so David flips it right back. He promises to put Goliath in the dust in verse 46, which corresponds, by the way, with Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. This I do want you to see, even though you know this, but I want you to see it again. Genesis chapter 3, verse 14, the Lord said to the serpent, because you've done this, cursed are you among all animals and among wild creatures, and upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll strike your head, and you'll strike his heel. David promises to put Goliath's head in the dirt. It's a play on the Edenic statement. David is promising to make Goliath eat dirt. By the way, the snakes don't eat dirt. So this is one indication where one of two or maybe both things are happening at the same time. Either it's a hyperbolic statement that your mouth's so close to the ground, it'll be as if you eat dirt, or it's prophetic. Hey, snake, someday your head's coming off and you will eat dirt. It'll be... And so 1 Samuel 17 is a way of showing that illustrated in the story of David and Goliath, and it's how David talks. Now, in the next few verses, basically what occurs is the moment that David stops talking, the Philistine draws near to meet David. David runs to his spot, and Goliath begins to charge across the field. I kind of think that what happens is that Goliath watches David start to swing. And I think it hits Goliath before the rock does. I got to cut the distance. I've always kind of liked the idea that he knew he was going down before he went down. Because we always kind of think he thought he was winning until the very last second. I kind of like the moment where it hits him. Like, uh-oh. If I don't get to this kid and cut the distance, I'm in trouble. I got to just hope he misses. And that I'm a big target. There's a lot of me to hit, but how many rocks does he have? And I've also thought it was curious that David takes 5. 5's the Hebrew number for grace. And so he just reaches into the creek, he reaches into the living water and pulls out grace for today and lets grace fight his battles. Lets the rock do what the rock must do. But then this happens. Well, David wins. He hits Goliath between the eyes with a rock. Goliath falls down. David runs over, grabs Goliath's sword, and chops his head off. He shall bruise your head. You shall bruise his heel. Okay, there goes the head. Goliath's eating dust. Now, what was the deal? 1-on-1, right? We win. You're our servants. You win, we're your servants. What should the Philistines have done when David picks that sword up and chops Goliath's head off? Drop their weapons and surrender. What should happen to the world of darkness and sin when Jesus comes bursting out of the other side at the resurrection? The world should just become a better place like that, right? Jesus won. The enemy ought to just lay down because they're beaten. But did they? No. The world kept right on turning after the resurrection. And there's still darkness in the land. And there's still death. And there's still evil. And there's still sin. And there's still wickedness. And I think it's because, look at 17:51, he kills him. And when the Philistines, David stood over the Philistine, grasped his sword, drew it out, killed him. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. You see, the Philistines don't surrender even though they're rightly defeated. It sounds like the enemy today that doesn't surrender even though it's rightly defeated. And Paul said to the Corinthians that Jesus will reign as he puts the enemies under his feet. And I don't believe that that means that Jesus is still fighting the devil any more than it meant David had to keep fighting a dead Goliath. What Jesus did at the cross was swing the stone straight into the forehead of sin and death, and then walked over and chopped its head off so it could eat dust. He fulfilled Genesis 3:14 and 15. He burst out the other side of the grave in victory, and the enemy scattered. Beaten, but scattered. And anywhere we give it place, it'll do what it can do. Beaten, do what it can do. Slithering into our spot, wherever we'll let it take root, sure. Defeated? Absolutely. But if we don't know it, it can be nice and comfy. Darkness has no claim on light. Evil has no claim on good. Hell has no claim on heaven, and that's because David cut off Goliath's head, or Jesus cut off the head of sin and death. Now, to me, this is a great spot to land. David, let's just read it. 52. The troops of Israel and Judah rose up with a shout, pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. So the wounded Philistines fell on their way from Sharaim as far as Gath and Ekron. The Israelites came back from chasing the Philistines and plundered the camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Now this is weird. Jerusalem is not yet the city of the people of God. In fact, at this time, it's not the people of God's city at all. David travels 20 miles from the valley of Elah to Jerusalem. Church Father Origen wrote that the early church fathers were in agreement that David took the skull to Jerusalem and buried it outside the city on a hill that in Latin gets called Calvary. Luke 23:33 says that Jesus was crucified on a hill called Calvary. Your NRSV of Luke 23:33 says that Jesus was crucified on a hill called the Skull. Matthew 27:33 says that Jesus was crucified on a hill that in the Hebrew, remember there's a bunch of different words, a bunch of different languages for the same thing, that in the Hebrew is called Golgotha, and then in parentheses in Matthew 27:33 it says a place also called the place of the skull. So I ask you, what skull? Church Father Origen also wrote that his peers taught that the etymology of the word Golgotha was Gaul, G-O-L, Goliath, of Gath. And I told you to remember where this big dude was from. 1 Samuel 17:4, Goliath was from a place called Gath. And for hundreds of years, even up until the organization of the canon of the New Testament, the early church preached that the blood of Jesus came off the cross, spilled onto the ground, seeped in at the base of the cross, and conquered an old skull underneath the dirt from an old giant named Goliath that had been buried there by David 1,200 years earlier. Now you can go, well, that's just legend. Who cares? But oh, what a connection. What a connection that at the place of the skull, Jesus goes to the cross and his blood spills into the dust and defeats every giant you will ever encounter in your land, even if it doesn't know its head's been cut off yet. You see, there are giants in your land, but they've been beaten. They just don't know it, and sometimes neither do you, because you need your eyes opened so that you can see that there's more for you than there are against you. So even though they're chatterboxing you and they're yelling and they're screaming and your temptation is to put on every piece of armor Daddy taught you and the world taught you and school taught you and the earth taught you and living taught you, stay in your lane. Know you've got a covenant. Use the talents and the wisdom God gave you. open your eyes and realize the giant's already got his head cut off. And it isn't because you're slick, smart, good-looking, wealthy, powerful. It's because Jesus' blood fell at a place called the skull. Oh, by the way, just for the jollies, can you guess where Sunday's lectionary reading is for the Gospels? Opening verse, and they crucified him at a place called the skull. I went berserk when I saw that that's what I'm preaching Sunday. Satan, his name means accuser. I want to give it to you in one paragraph right here, okay? Satan's name means accuser. He was cast out in Revelation 12:10. Cast down, rather, at Revelation 12:10. Where did that happen? At the cross, John 12:31-33. I just put these verses in here for you to look them up on your own. Satan was cast down at the cross because Christ was made to be sin, 2 Corinthians 5:21. And Christ died as the serpent, John 3:14-15. Because of all this, we don't fight Satan. I know we love warrior talk in America. We love soldiers and fighting, and we love the idea that we're on fire for God. We're going to go out here and slay the devil, and we're going to be warriors for Jesus. Man, you're just too late. You're just too late. Jesus walked out onto the battlefield, squared off with the accuser, and took it unto himself. Here's what you get to do. 2 Corinthians 10. This is how we'll close. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3, 4, and 5 says this. Indeed, we live as human beings. Yes, we do. But we do not wage war according to human standards. For the weapons of our warfare are not merely human. They have divine power to destroy strongholds. You go, oh, see, Pastor, we do get to fight. Okay, well, read on. Here's what you get to fight. We destroy arguments and every proud obstacle raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. Well, there you go. There's your role, is your fight. Are you watching? Because you're going to need to see this. Your fight is right here. That's right. This is what you fight. This is what you get to do. You get to straighten up the way you think. You get to repent every day of the way you think about God and the way you think about yourself. You get to know who you are, and you get to keep reinforcing it. You get to take every argument against God and who God is and how finished the work is, and you get to rebuke it. You get to let it know its head's been cut off, that God is loving, that God did finish the work, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're loved anyway. And if you can do that work, then you're a good soldier. Paul said, be a good soldier. What's a good soldier then? You're on the winning side. Your army won because Jesus cut the head of Goliath off. You already won. You get to just run out on the battlefield and be the victor. The only battle you have is up here. And the faster you can go to war there, the better off your tomorrows will be. Bow your heads with me. What a moment. Jesus, the giant killer. I don't even say, at this point in the lesson, I don't even say David, the giant killer. I say Jesus, the giant killer. Lord Jesus Christ, you are the light of the world. Fill my mind with your light. Fill my heart with your love. A mind filled with your light and a heart filled with your love is my only battlefield. I repent and change my mind, and I pray I can do it daily so that I can realize the giant of sin and death has been beaten. Its head has been cut off. The blood of Jesus is my Redeemer. My battlefield then is to battle every thought that brings itself against the knowledge of who you are. And I pray that for this group, and I pray that for those watching. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for joining us for this week's program. If you would like more information, please visit our website at paulwhiteministries.com. Here you can find thousands of sermons, shop for Pastor Paul's books and series, and become either a monthly partner or a one-time donor. You can also visit our church website at midlandsgardenchurch.org. For written correspondence or to donate by check, write us at Paul White Ministries, P.O. Box 1030, Flowery Branch, Georgia, 30542. Join us again next week here in the Garden of Grace.